Welcome to round 7 of the US Chess Championship, and let me tell you, this round has everything you were hoping for. It has a grandmaster getting crushed in the opening, falling for a trap, and having to resign on move 10. It has a brilliant attacking game where one player chooses the top computer engine move on virtually every move of their game, and it has Hans Niemann getting, well, you'll see what happens to Hans Niemann. Stick around to the end of the video for that. So without any further delay, let's look at the 3 games that I found most interesting from this round 7 of the US Chess Championship. I'm going to review the shortest and the juiciest game first. Dominguez with the white pieces versus Moradiabadi playing black. Now this game is rare in that you get to witness a grandmaster resigning on move 10 with a completely lost position. So let's see what went wrong for Moradiabadi. Dominguez plays e4. We got e5 and knight f3. Petrov defense with knight to f6. Knight takes e5. The knight's kicked back. And then knight takes e4. These are all the standard opening moves. d5, bishop d3, bishop e7. Everything's going fine so far. Move number 7, white castles. It's incredible to think that in 3 moves, Moradiabadi will be resigning. How could this go wrong? Well, we got bishop to f5. And now Dominguez plays an early c4. Most of the time white will play rook e1 first, and after black castles, now c4 can be played. The point is, now that we have the rook and the bishop on the knight, black cannot play d takes c4 or he will lose the piece on e4. But playing c4 before putting the rook on e1 gives black the option to capture on c4. This knight will have enough protection, and that may be black's best option here. Knight c6 isn't too bad, c6 isn't bad, but Moradiabadi blunders with the move castle. It's not very common that getting your king out of danger in a position like this by castling is actually a blunder. But Dominguez knows his openings, realizing that after c takes d5, queen takes d5, which is what Moradiabadi played, loses the game. Now this is an opening trap that is known, and Dominguez was aware of it, but Moradiabadi, not being a player who specializes in the Petrov, was just completely oblivious to the danger. Now, what do you think white's winning move is here? Bishop takes e4. Black will lose a piece. And at this point, Moradiabadi realizes what's happened and he resigns. So let's see what would have happened if he would have captured this bishop on e4. Queen takes e4, rook e1. Once the queen moves, this bishop on e7's lost. There was nowhere that queen could go to defend that bishop. So black loses a piece. What about bishop takes e4? No problem with rook e1 now, right? Unfortunately here there's knight c3. Forking the queen and bishop. After the queen moves somewhere, knight takes e4, and it's going to be the same story. Queen takes e4, rook e1. Queen has no way to defend that bishop on e7. One other variation I should mention, if at this point black tried bishop takes f3, counterattacking the white queen, white will just take on d5, threatening to take this bishop with check. So after bishop takes d1, knight takes e7 comes a check, king must move, and now rook takes d1. Still leaves white with an extra piece. So a very easy win for Dominguez. He said in the post-game interview that he hadn't played a game like that in 20 years. So that's a great demonstration of why it's so important to study your openings and be aware of any opening traps, because not even grandmasters are immune from being caught off guard. So let's move on. In this next game, we have an amazing performance from Robson with the white pieces, playing against Wesley So, which is remarkable in that Robson plays the #1 computer engine choice. I'm using Stockfish 15. He plays Stockfish 15's #1 choice on every single move except for one. So I'm going to go to that position where Robson decides to attack the king side. And it occurs here. After queen to f8, Robson played g4. And Stockfish doesn't think this is the best move. It prefers a4. However, its initial evaluation of dead even slowly starts to change, and it starts to think that white has an advantage. Now, Robson said that this position was in his preparation. He knew that after queen f8, he could get a good attack with g4. So I can't rule out the possibility that maybe he had better hardware than me, and maybe after a deep think, Stockfish actually agrees that this g4 is the strongest move. Or maybe he even had a better computer program than Stockfish 15. Maybe he had something that's more comparable to AlphaZero. I don't know what these top GMs have access to. But after g4, Wesley So plays h6. It's the correct move, preventing an immediate g5 to kick that knight away. And Robson goes king h2. He's going to play g5 at the right moment. He's going to put a rook here, and it's a very standard kingside attack. And at this point, Wesley So goes wrong. He plays c6. And Robson said in his post-game interview that he didn't remember that move from his preparation, so he figured it must be bad. And he was correct. Now, Wesley So does have the right idea to strike at White's central pawns, but he does it in the wrong way. Correct would have been b5, keeping the diagonal for this bishop open, striking at the base of the pawn chain instead. Now, I'm going to show you a variation with this move b5 that's similar to what happened in the game, so you can see why it's important to have this diagonal open for the bishop. g5, and here Black has b takes c4. Now, if White was to recapture this pawn, then he's removing either his queen or his bishop from the view of the king side. So it slows down White's attack a little bit. So the best move here for White may be to play bishop f5. Just keep the queen and the bishop on this diagonal. Just ignore this pawn for now. And now Black can take on g5. Knight takes g5. Now this is similar to what happened in the game, except in this line, Black has this option to take the pawn on d5 with his bishop at the right moment. The point is, at this moment, g6 is a defense for Black. Now let's look at the same line after c6 is played, like in the game, instead of b5. See what the difference is. c6 blocking the diagonal for the bishop. g5 is played in the game by Robson. H takes g5. Knight takes g5. Now here Wesley plays c takes d5, because in this line g6 does not work, because White has bishop takes g6. This sacrifice is working for White because after the pawn takes the bishop, queen takes g6 check. Black needs to defend by putting the queen in the way. If you move the king to h8, queen h7 is mate because this knight is pinned to the king. There's no knight takes queen. So queen g7 is necessary. White plays queen f5. The threat now is to bring the rook to g1 with big problems. Now, if Black could take this pawn on d5 right now, like in the previous variation, he would actually be okay. So let's look at that other variation. Bishop takes d5. Now if rook g1's played, there's king to f8. The king can hide over there, and if this bishop was not on d5, this defensive move would not be possible because there'd be a fork of the king and queen. But the bishop is guarding against that. So that demonstrates why g6 is not working in the game. So in the game, c takes d5 was played by Wesley So, and now we have this beautiful move from Robson. Top computer move, of course, bishop h7 check. Okay, obviously you can't take the bishop or you're going to get checkmated, so the king has to move. The king goes to h8, and then there's bishop to f5. So when I first looked at this game, I thought, what was the point of getting the king over to h8? Okay, it's on a half-open file, but I saw that the computer said that that bishop h7 check was the only winning move. So I did a little investigating with the engine, and this is what I found. First of all, the immediate threat for White is to just take this knight on d7, of course. If the knight recaptures, then there's checkmate. Okay. And Black would love to defend against that with g6. But here, since the king was checked and forced to go to h8, bishop takes d7 wins a piece. This knight is pinned to the king. That was the point of making the king go to h8. If you hadn't played that check first, if you had just immediately moved your bishop to f5, g6 would be a decent defense. And Stockfish says the position is close to equal. So very nice move by Robson. After this bishop f5, the threat of bishop takes d7 followed by queen h7 mate has to be dealt with. So Wesley So makes the only reasonable defensive move, knight to e5, blocking the bishop's access to the knight on f6. If you try to just defend with the rook like this, there's bishop takes d7, rook takes, bishop takes, like this, queen h7 mate. That's not working. So after knight to e5, f4. Now the knight must move. Wesley So chooses knight to g6, putting another piece in the vicinity of his king, hoping to defend. Robson said that his initial idea was bishop takes g6, and after the pawn takes, he grabs his pawn on g6, but then he saw that queen e8 can defend. The queen's under attack. You don't have time to take out the knight and try to checkmate. So black is actually okay here. So Robson rejected that line and he played the best move. Bishop takes f6. After the pawn recaptures, he found this nice tactic. Knight takes f7 check, removing the defender of this knight so that after queen takes f7, there's bishop takes g6, regaining the piece. And the black king is totally exposed now. But does Robson have enough pieces to exploit that fact? Yes, he does. Let's see how it went down. Queen to e7 played. It's going to be necessary to keep the white queen off of this file. So this is a nice move. After white's next move, queen to f2, looking to come into h4, black plays f5. The queen's watching over that square. Robson said he missed this defense when he was analyzing, but white's attack is far from over. Robson gets his rook into the action now. Rook g8. He said at some point he also missed this idea of putting the rook to g8, followed by, after rook g5 from white, blocking the queen's access to h4, so this is now a threat. Rook g7, giving the king an opportunity to get out of danger. After queen h4, played by Robson, the king can go to g8. So has white's attack dried up? No, Robson again finds the strongest move. Queen to h5. Guards e2, that's important. We don't want the black queen to come in here, start harassing our king. And now white has a threat. Robson mentioned the following line. If d takes c4 is played here, white's threat is bishop h7 check. The king goes here. We take the pawn with check. You got to put the rook in the way. Bishop g6 would just win. The rook's under attack, and if you take on f5, queen h8 is mate. And this is a similar variation to what happened in the actual game. So let's go back to what was played in the game. Instead of d takes c4, Wesley So plays bishop c8, adding some defense to this pawn so that the idea of playing bishop h7 check followed by taking this pawn isn't working anymore. Here Robson just coolly takes the pawn. Black is so tied up here that he doesn't have any good moves, and Robson is just free to take pawns and think about what his next steps are. You know, this rook has nowhere to go. This queen can't go very far. You try coming in here, maybe you want to deliver some checks. This is going to fail to bishop f7 check. Can't be taken with the rook or you'll be in check once the king goes to f8. Queen h8 check is going to pick up this rook one way or another. So moving that queen doesn't work, and this bishop doesn't really have any useful moves. So Wesley So just plays a5. What else is he going to do? And again, Robson finds the strongest plan. Queen to h6. The plan now is bishop h7 check. Once the king goes to f8, this rook will be pinned to the king. That's the plan. And he's not worried about queen e2 check, because he's just going to put the rook in the way with an attack on the queen. So all that does is just give Robson another tempo to work with. Wesley So just plays b5 because he's got nothing else to do. If you play queen f6 to try to just consolidate, there's bishop h7 check, and your queen is going to be lost unless you try to defend with the king. But then we got bishop g8 check. How are you going to keep defending your queen? I guess you got to go here. But now rook g7 check. So that's a cute little line. But we had b5 in the game. And now for the final blow. Bishop h7 check. King goes to f8. Rook g2. Stopping any potential checks from the queen. This rook is pinned. It's not going anywhere. And black doesn't have any moves. And so Wesley So resigns here. Because what's coming next is bishop takes f5 with the threat of queen coming into h8. So let's say you take the bishop. Queen h8 check. Put the rook in the way, that's checkmate. You move the king somewhere. That's going to be a mate in 2. If instead you try moving the king to here to try to stop the queen h8, there's just queen h7. Because this rook is pinned, can't take the queen. Once the king moves, now we'll go to h8. So a spectacular engine-like performance from Ray Robson. And the more I look at his games, the more I'm becoming a fan. He seems to be playing more and more like a machine all the time. And lest anyone accuse him of cheating, I'd like to point out that in the post-game interview, He gave a lot of very concrete variations that he was thinking about during the game. No cryptic or evasive answers. Just a very, very strong tactical player. In this final game I want to show you, we have Darius Swerts with the white pieces up against everybody's favorite player, Hans Niemann with black. And I just want to show you this key position where Hans Niemann began to go wrong. Darius Swerts captured the pawn on c5. Now the best response by Niemann would have been b takes c5. He took with the knight. Let me show you the difference. After b takes c5, knight d6 is what white is planning. You do not want to take that knight out with your bishop. I will show you why shortly. You need to move this rook out of danger, and then when white plays knight d2, looking to go to e4 to back up their knight, you can get some counterplay with a4 along this file here. White cannot play b4 here because the pawn will just be captured with the pawn. Black is doing very well here. Contrast that to the game where Hans Niemann took with the knight. Now knight d6 is played by white, and Niemann goes wrong. He takes the knight with the bishop. If he would have played the better move, moving the rook, now in this line, after knight d2, a4 is not working so well because white can get away with b4. And if you try to take that pawn with the knight, knight takes b7, knight takes, and now we got rook to c7. Hitting the bishop on e7, if it's defended, you got rook takes e7, rook takes, and then bishop a3. This knight pinned to the rook. Black's got no good way to save that knight. If instead you just move the bishop or something, we can take here, here, and then we'll just go here. If the knight moves, we can take on f8. Here if king takes, we got queen takes h7. So just some sample lines to demonstrate why it's not good to let that rook get into c7. Black is losing. But this wasn't even an issue because Niemann decided to play bishop takes d6. And see if you can find white's strongest move here. We do not capture the bishop. We play knight g5, little in-between move, threatening some checkmate. That has to be dealt with. Now the computer engine says f5 is the strongest, even though it's not good. White is winning. But Niemann played g6, which makes life perhaps easier for white, because after e takes d6 and queen b8 by Niemann, looking to pick up that pawn, there's rook c4 with some nasty possibilities of getting this rook over to this file. The immediate threat is just knight takes h7, and if the king takes, rook h4 check. This is going to lead to checkmate, rook h8 defended by the bishop. And even if you try to kick that knight, which is what Niemann did, you have problems. The computer says the strongest move here is just rook h4, but what Swerts found in the game was also winning. Knight takes e6. Now you cannot capture that knight with the pawn because queen takes g6 is checkmate. Niemann saw that and he took the knight with the knight. But now this knight is lacking protection, and after bishop takes d5, bishop takes, rook takes, white gets the sacrificed piece back. This diagonal is super vulnerable to attack, and there's this passed pawn, which is moving forward on the very next move. After queen b7, there's d7, counterattacking this rook, and at this point, Hans Niemann resigns. This diagonal is just too weak. This passed pawn is just too strong. If he were to take the rook on d5, obviously this loses material after the pawn takes the rook on c8, this and this. White's a rook up. So what is he going to try to do? Blockade the pawn somehow? You could play rook takes c4, pawn takes, and then you could put the rook here. But now you got queen to d3. And what are you going to do about this pawn? You want to try to win it with knight to f8? There's queen d4, threatening checkmate. So you cannot neglect this diagonal. What else can you try to do? Maybe put the rook in the way like that. We'll play queen d3. Here you can try knight c5, since in this line, if white tries to line up on this diagonal, there is f6, since the rook is defending. But white could just play queen e3 here. Attacking h6, and there's not even a great defense, because if you go king h7, what would you play here as white? If you said queen takes h6, you found the fastest win, because after king takes, rook h4 is checkmate. So Niemann had to throw in the towel, which resulted in his third straight loss in this U.S. Championship. Going through a bit of a rough patch. So that concludes my review of round 7 of the U.S. Championship. Hope you enjoyed it. Please subscribe for more analysis very similar to this on all the latest and most important games in chess coming your way soon. Thanks for watching.